Right. Talking about Salem's Lot, Stephen King's second published novel. Now, this followed Carrie, which I've already reviewed. And Carrie, I said at the time, it reminded me a lot of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Just the way that that book is written with the various, newspaper clippings or periodicals and stuff that were in that book. The way that the narrative devices that were used told that story with people having written memoirs and whatnot and telling it through kind of those in addition to the regular narrative. So yeah, it really reminded me of Bram Stoker's Dracula. And his follow-up book, is about vampires. So, and not just any vampires, but like Bram Stoker type vampires. These are basically follow the same rules as the vampires in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So the whole psychic link that the vampires share together, just like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, when Dracula shared like a psychic bond with his minions. You'll find that in here. The fact that the vampires are repelled by garlic and wild roses, that comes straight out of Bram Stoker. Stakes through the heart, they're afraid of crosses, they're repelled by holy water. All that stuff just comes straight from Bram Stoker. So, but this isn't just like Bram Stoker in New England, okay? That would be really undermining or selling the novel short on what it's actually about. Now, that may have been the premise, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. And some of the problems I had, I actually did a review on Bram Stoker, and one of the things that was in that novel that kind of confused me when I read Dracula was how was Van Helsing getting host? Because they were placing, the Eucharist, they're using it to repel Dracula or destroy his resting places and whatnot. Well, I said, how would Van Helsing get that? It's not like a priest is just going to hand that over to you. And in this book, one of the people that's in the story is Father Donald Callahan. I'll talk about him in a minute, but let's just talk about the plus and minuses of the book. So right up front, I'll tell you, this is a 4-star book for me. It's a very good book. I enjoy it as much. I'm not sure if I enjoy it more than The Dead Zone, but as much as The Dead Zone, which thus far is my favorite Stephen King book, and I think this is tied. It's really hard for me to place this above The Dead Zone, or I think they're neck and neck, which is a good thing. I'm having a hard time picking one over the other, but this one is. It starts out pretty slow. I think a lot of people have complained from what I've seen about how slow the story is, but I think it was necessary to kind of get a feel for this little town, Jerusalem's Lot, before everything starts to go crazy. I think the first person we meet is the milkman, who is just like doing his morning deliveries, dropping off milk and filling out orders for sour cream and whatnot. We get a little tour of the town. We go through these little vignettes, right? We meet this person, and then this person, and then this person. Just a little snapshot of a moment in time in their life, so that you really get a sense of like this little small town of Jerusalem's Lot. And the writing here really reminded me a lot of Ray Bradbury. It had kind of a Ray Bradbury feel to it, which I really like Ray Bradbury quite a bit. So yeah, I thought that Stephen King's writing here in describing small town America was good. Now this town has a dark has some darkness in it. You're gonna also read about people having affairs, about the town, drunkard. A particularly gruesome piece of writing here is when this woman literally punches her baby in the face, and I was just like horrified by it. but it's these little like small evils that are in the town. And that's something that we'll talk about in a minute concerning Father Donald Callahan's character. So I want to talk about some of the main characters. We have this man, Ben Mears, who's a writer. This is basically another Stephen King self-insert. Okay, Stephen King putting himself into the book. We saw the writer, with Jack Torrance in The Shining, and then the school teacher in Johnny Smith in The Dead Zone. So school teachers and writers seem to be populating Stephen King's story. I mean, his stories, but you write what you know. So I'm not going to knock him too bad on it. But Ben Mears, for the most part, is not really that interesting of a character. I mean, he's an okay protagonist, but he's not like my favorite character in the book or anything by a long shot. One of the problems that I have with this, the stuff that's like holding it back from being a 5-star book, for instance, is when Ben Mears comes back to this town where he was at when he was a child. After his father died, he stayed with his aunt in Jerusalem's lot for a while. So he's returning. And there's this girl named Susan Norton who's basically reading Ben Mears' book when he returns to the town, and she essentially just like looks up and sees him standing there and falls in love immediately. I mean, not quite like that fast, but I mean, it's really fast, and it's just really like, no, this is unbelievable. Very pulpy. So it's those little things like that that kind of hold it back. And, some of the cringe stuff that's in King, although there's not a lot of it in this one. It's one of the reasons why I think I like this book so much. And I don't think there was as much cringe content in The Dead Zone either. When you're talking about cringy stuff, you know what I mean. Just trash can man and the kid in the stand, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Just the whole relationship between Nadine and Harold in the stand. I mean, it's cringe, dude. So we don't have that type of cringy stuff going on in this book. So it's much more enjoyable because of it. Also, I don't think there's any, I think all the characters in this book are Caucasian, white. So we don't get any of the racially charged language that we get in some of the other King novels. The problematic magic black characters that are in those books, like, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's, now some people might complain the lack of representation, but I mean, I live in a small town, and small town America, like where I'm at, for instance, I don't know of any people of color that live here. Okay. So, and that's just a reality. I don't know why that is. I wouldn't be opposed if I had, neighbors next door that were non-white. There's just not any that live in this town. So even today, okay, in 2024, when I'm doing this review, okay, 1975, I mean, it's a reality. There are small towns in this country that are, they're just one race communities. It's weird, I know, but it's real. Now, where I work, I drive into town for work, and most of my coworkers that I work with, I'm the minority, okay, at where I work. All right, most of the people in my department are people of color, and I'm like one of a handful of straight white males that work in my department, because I work where I work. It's very multicultural. But I got on a whole side tangent there about small towns. But so we got Ben Mears, like I said, the writer. Susan Norton, she's basically a useless character. Some of the other main characters we get are Matt Burke. Matt Burke is a school teacher, so maybe this is another facet of King's personality coming out here. Matt Burke is basically the former teacher of our protagonist, Ben Mears. And there's a lot of commentary in this about the critics' response to Ben Mears' books. So this is perhaps Stephen King telling us what he thinks of critics, and you know, Matt Burke is a fan of Ben Mears' writing, tells him as much. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of get a little insight into what King is thinking about critics. We also have a child in this story. I think he's 12 years old, named Mark Petrie. Mark Petrie is probably one of my favorite characters of my two favorite characters in this book. Okay. Mark Petrie builds little like monster kits, like Universal monsters, and he's into like the Universal monster horror films, Hammer movies. He, is into magic, like the Harry Houdini stuff. So there is one incident in this book where I had to suspend my disbelief concerning Mark, but I was enjoying the story so much that I kind of let it slide. But it is one of those things where you think about it and you go, yeah, that's pretty improbable. So it holds it back from being like a great book, but it's a really good book. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff in this, some of the ideas. One of the ideas in this book that's presented is this Marston house, okay? And about, can a place become tainted by evil? Like, can it absorb evil into itself? I think this was further explored in Stephen King's The Shining, which was his follow-up to this, where the hotel in that book really became like a character. The Marston house in this book is a character, but that theme is that story of that house is not fully explored as it is in The Shining. Now, most people think The Shining is a better book than this. I would disagree with them. They think that The Stand is a better book than this. I would definitely disagree with them. I can understand why people would like The Shining more. That just wasn't my cup of tea. But The Stand, no way. The Stand is as far as book is concerned, is overrated. That's one of the things I talk about is people that complain, the same people, because I've watched the reviews, same people that will complain about how slow this book is, will turn around and say that they love The Stand and that it's like the greatest Stephen King book, which makes no sense to me. Because I'd much rather take a book that starts slow for the first 200 pages and then ramps up and really gets going, as opposed to a book like The Stand that starts really fast, then completely gets bogged down in 400 pages of boredom in the middle, and then finishes with a literal deus ex machina. At least the characters' actions in this book matter. So despite what you may think of the ending, okay, it's got a better ending than The Stand. The Stand's ending is ridiculous. And while maybe this book's ending seems a little anticlimactic, okay, at least the characters had to do something. So coming off of reading that and then reading this was like a breath of fresh air. This was very breezy, even though it's clocking in at like 650 some pages as compared to The Stand, which I think was like, I don't know, it was way long. It was almost double the length of this. This felt light by comparison. So some of the things like I was talking about, can a place become tainted by evil, absorb evil? And this is where I want to talk a little bit about the use of the cross and the use of holy water and stuff in this book, which I really liked the way that was presented. This is like basically a good versus evil story, cut and dry, right down the middle. But the way that the cross glows when it's in the presence of vampires, it very much reminded me of Tolkien. Frodo's sword Sting, when goblins were close by, it would glow with brilliant light. Same thing happens with the cross in Salem's Lot here. The cross actually glows, which I was like, oh, that's cool, man. So, yeah, I don't know, man. This very much it kind of reminded me a bit of I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, kind of like a modern setting with these really nasty vampires. These are not your sparkle vampires for Twilight. These are not the sexy vampire Brad Pitt, from Interview with the Vampire. These vampires are scary. Okay, like they can, just like in Bram Stoker, they can like turn into smoke, mist, and like go through cracks and doors and stuff. They can grow big, small, all the stuff that Bram Stoker's Dracula does. These vampires are the same ones from his universe. And I think it's pretty great. Now, spoilerly talk. I'm going to get into Father Donald Callahan, and one of the things that really elevated this from a 3-star book to a 4-star book for me. And it was Donald Callahan's, this Father Donald Callahan, this traditionalist Roman Catholic priest, and kind of when Matt Burke calls him to basically help out battling vampires, you know. So if you don't want to hear that conversation, I'm not going to spoil the ending of the book, but I do want to read a passage and talk about it for a minute because I found it very interesting. It's the thing that put this up and elevated it to a higher level from just being your typical run-of-the-mill 3-star book. So here's your chance to tune out now. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're talking about Father Callahan. So he is a traditionalist Roman Catholic priest who wants to battle real evil, not small evil with a little e, but like real medieval type evil. And he's kind of having a crisis of faith, and I think he gets introduced somewhere around the 200 page mark of the book. But towards the 3rd section here, where he's getting into this conversation with Matt Burke about vampires, Father Callahan at first thinks that Burke is kind of crazy, but, you know, he hears him out. And let's see, what does he say? This is on page 463. They're talking about Edgar Allan Poe and transcendentalism and Hawthorne and stuff. And he says, "You're amazingly conversant on the subject," Matt said. The priest shrugged. "I had a boy's interest in the occult and the outre," he said, "and as I grew older, my calling to the priesthood enhanced rather than retarded it." He sighed deeply. "But lately I've begun to ask myself some rather hard questions about the nature of evil in the world." With a twisted smile, he added, "It's spoiled a lot of the fun." "Then would you investigate a few things for me? And would you be adverse to taking along some holy water and a bit of the host?" "You're treading on uneasy theological ground now," Callahan said with genuine gravity. "Why?" "I'm not going to say no at this point," Callahan said. "And I ought to tell you that if you'd gotten a younger priest, he probably would have said yes almost at once, with a few, if any, qualms at all." He smiled bitterly. "They viewed the trappings of the church as symbolic rather than practical, like a shaman's headdress and medicine stick. This young priest might decide you were crazy, but if shaking a little holy water around would ease your craziness, fine and dandy. I can't do that. If I should proceed to make your investigations a neat Harris Tweed with nothing under my arm but a copy of Sybil Leek's The Sensuous Exorcist or whatever, that would be between you and me. But if I go with the host, then I go as an agent of the Holy Catholic Church, prepared to execute what I would consider the most spiritual rites of my office. Then I go as Christ's representative on earth." He was now looking at Matt seriously, solemnly. "I may be a poor excuse for a priest. At times I've thought so, a bit jaded, a bit cynical, and lately suffering a crisis of, what, faith, identity? But I still believe enough in the awesome mystical and apothetic power of the church, which stands behind me, to tremble a bit at the thought of accepting your request lightly." Now, King does use the wrong theological term here. He says apathetic power. That is the idea that you literally become one with God so that God can ascend and become one and the same with God. As far as I know, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't believe that. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I don't believe that the Roman Catholic Church would say apathetic. They would say theanthropic, the same as an Orthodox priest would say. A theanthropic God-man organism, right? So it's literally like the embodiment of Christ on the earth, but it's not, we as human beings can never become God. that God is uncreated, we are created, so you can't become apathetic. It's theosis, not apatheosis. So there is a distinction. So I'm not going to give King trouble with that. He doesn't know. Unless you've read a lot of theological books, you wouldn't know that. So I just did want to point that out. But he says here, the church is more than a bundle of ideals, as these younger fellows seem to believe. It's more than a spiritual Boy Scout troop. The church is a force, and one does not set a force in motion lightly. He frowned severely at Matt. Do you understand that? Your understanding is vitally important. I understand. You see, the overall concept of evil in the Catholic Church has undergone a radical change in this century. Do you know what caused it? I imagine it was Freud. Very good. The Catholic Church began to cope with a new concept as it marched into the 20th century, evil with a small e, with a devil that was not a red-horned monster complete with spiked tail and cloven hooves, or a serpent crawling through the garden, although that is a remarkably apt psychological image. The devil, according to the gospel, according to Freud, would be a gigantic composite id, the subconscious of us all. Surely a more stupendous concept than red-tailed boogies or demons with such sensitive noses that they can be banished with one good fart from a constipated churchman, Matt said. Stupendous, of course, but impersonal, merciless, untouchable. Banishing Freud's devil is as impossible as Shylock's bargain. To extract a pound of flesh without spilling a drop of blood, the Catholic Church has been forced to reinterpret its whole approach to evil. Bombers over Cambodia, the war in Ireland and the Middle East, cop killings and ghetto riots, the billion smaller evils loosed on the world each day like a plague of gnats. It is in the process of shedding its old medicine man skin and re-emerging as a socially acceptive, socially conscious body. The inner city rap center ascending over the confessional, communion playing second fiddle to the civil rights movement, and urban renewal. The church has been in the process of planting both feet in this world, where there are no witches or incubi or vampires, Matt said, but only child beating, incest, and the rape of the environment. Yes, Matt said deliberately. And you hate it, don't you? Yes, Callahan said quietly. I think it's an abomination. It's the Catholic Church's way of saying that God isn't dead, only a little senile. I guess that's my answer, isn't it? What do you want me to do? Father Callahan is, in my opinion, the greatest Stephen King character that is in this novel. And I actually like him more than Johnny Smith in The Dead Zone. This guy has some layers, man, like an onion. And if he would have been like the lead of the book, I think that would have maybe put it as a 5-star book for me. I really like this character a lot. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I think that piece of the book and the complexity and layers of this priest that's living in the modern age, in the age of modernity, and is struggling with the fact that psychology and the modern world has banished the idea of, a real evil with just these small little psychological pseudoscientific nonsense, and has banished the thoughts of things that go bump in the night. And now he is forced to confront, real evil, master vampire. That is interesting. That's one of the reasons why I really like Salem's Lot. And you know what? That's it. I just decided this is better than The Dead Zone. Salem's Lot is my new favorite Stephen King book. There you go. Read this one in September. Start reading this mid-September and read it, September, October. This whole book takes place at the beginning of fall. So this is a good full-time read, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. You may not want to read it at night, though, because it's got some pretty spooky scenes in it that will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. All right. Thanks for watching. I know this was long, but I really wanted to squeeze that in because I thought it was great. Have a wonderful day.